Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wei T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another awesome health podcast and some excellent info for you to dive into today. We are going to be talking about the difference between your mind and your body there and your brain. In fact, your mind and your brain are not the same, but they are connected to your body. So we're going to learn all about that in this episode. I'm really excited to dive into this. And our very special guest today is Kayla Osterhoff. And she is a health scientist, a professional athlete, entrepreneur, health optimization practitioner, and a global leader in integrative mind-body medicine. Now, what's interesting is she's formally trained across a spectrum of health sciences, got a bachelor of science in ecology, a master of science in public health, and is currently pursuing her doctoral degree in neuropsychophysiology and biochemistry. Say that 3 times. I would probably fail the test, let alone do a PhD. That's why we bring in the experts here at the podcast. So what's really interesting is Kayla's got a great story. We're going to dive into it. She witnessed the true cost of devastation of mental illness and addiction. This was a catalyst for her career. We're going to dive into that a little bit. And she wanted to understand why the human body, why some people suffer from illness, disease, and why other people don't. I've always wondered about this too. In fact, it was part of my own journey, as people know. When my sister got ill, at 15, I was curious, why was she sick and why was I not? And what she discovered was that illness and disease are not inevitable, and in fact, can be prevented and cured through lifestyle. So she's worked in physical therapy and understanding exercise science and movement modalities. And this also was the foundation for athletic accomplishments. So bottom line, I could keep going on and going on, but let's just get Kayla and let her start telling us all the good stuff. Kayla, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to talk to you today. And I know that you are a neuroscience nerd just as much as me, so it should be a fun conversation.
So, I think we're going to get into particularly the separation between the brain and the mind and the body, and then how to unify them. So how they compartmentalize and break out. But before we get into that, I think I'd like to get a little bit of your backstory and the inspiration that happened for you and how you got started in this whole thing.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it brief, but I think it all started with my mom, honestly, telling me from the time I can remember that I'm going to be a brain surgeon. And obviously I'm not a brain surgeon, but I am obsessed with the brain and the mind and the body and health and all of this stuff. And I really think that kind of laid the foundation, right? And then from there, I studied the health sciences through college. Like you said, my bachelor's was in exercise science and health ecology. And then I got my master's in public health. And I actually worked for several years at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in both cardiovascular disease, global programs for global health, and then also on a lot of these emergency responses like Zika virus, Ebola, and then I on actually the coronavirus response right before I left. So kind of a very fun background, but my passion is both the behavioral science aspect, which is where we learn a lot in public health, right? It's the basis for public health systems, but also the brain and the mind, which is actually 2 constructs that determine what our experiences, right? Or AKA what our reality is. Everybody's reality is different. And this goes back to what you were saying before, where disease manifests for some people and for some people health manifests, right? And this comes back to the mind and the body and how they interact. And so now in my doctoral studies, I am diving fully into that and looking at how, the brain physiology and the mind and how the 2 interact together to form what we call reality. So it's pretty interactive and fun, and I love talking about it.
It's beautiful that you bring that up, because I think in today's world, we are seeing people who are living literally side by side, but are living in a completely different reality, almost a polar existence. And we're seeing a lot of chaos as those two concepts of the world, or self-views, worldviews, life view, the processes and stuff that are undergoing. And we see these conflicts because each person is trying to put their reality onto someone else. And they're saying, get a reality check, or what's wrong with you, or how are you checked out? I think it's really important to understand maybe some of the physiological components and maybe the aspects of consciousness. So we have this brain that supposedly is where consciousness comes from, but there's some evidence that that's not actually true. Is that so? Can you kind of guide, what have you learned about all this stuff?
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. And just as a caveat, even into the scientific community, neuroscience and really understanding the brain is very new. For instance, just 10 years ago, we thought that we had a finite number of brain cells. And once they died, that was it, right? You lost it. You couldn't do anything about it. Now we know that that's not true. And that's only in recent years. And so it's kind of the most significant scientific problem of the 21st century, as far as a scientific standpoint, is really how does the physical brain produce the mind, right? Consciousness, as you said. So the way that I like to think about it and describe it to somebody who is not a neuroscientist or biologist is that you can think of the physical brain as the software of our human operating system, right? And sorry, the physical brain is the hardware of the human operating system. So it's a physical construct. This is neurochemical and electrical current systems, right? And then you can think of the mind as the software programming. It's the invisible side of our human operating system. And the two work together. So the mind, it comprises consciousness, which is both the subconscious mind and the conscious mind, and what we like to call the ego, which is our identification, right? And that is something that's learned from society, from our parents, from our upbringing and constructs. And that really determines the way that we perceive reality. So the two interact to kind of create what we experience as reality. But I do want to mention there is a third aspect. Science hasn't completely figured out how to measure, though science nods to the existence of this third entity, which is, you could call the soul or the spirit. You could call it collective consciousness. And I just mentioned this piece because it's an important piece that interacts with both the mind and the brain. And the way that I like to describe this one is through a quote from Eckhart Tolle. And so your listeners would probably be familiar with him. He's kind of a spiritual leader, right? And he said that when he had his spiritual awakening, he was lying in bed and he was contemplating suicide. And he just couldn't live with himself anymore. And he said in his mind, I cannot live with myself. And then it dawned on him, wait, who is I and who is myself? Are these two different things? So I guess you could kind of describe it as the I is the soul or the spirit, and then the myself is kind of the subconscious mind. And
it's super cool. Super cool. I got just to interject here and acknowledge that piece. So one of my favorite researchers and experts in this whole thing was a fellow by the name of Dr. David Hawkins. And he wrote a great series of books, and Power versus Force, and the I of I, EYE of I, and then eventually I. And he goes in depth. And here's a guy that was in part of, I don't know, literally hundreds of psychiatric practices, founded orthomolecular nutrition, built the map of consciousness, and was illustrating that when he was, a person going to where they were researching consciousness at Noetic Sciences, most of it was wrought in physiology. And he says, you can't find this thing, the mind is physical. And he likened it to an etheric brain or spirit or whatever, and they were developed concordant with certain states of being. What is your research indicated in this area? Because I think this is really, really fascinating. And I'm going to give people a little exercise in a second on the next piece that they can actually see this for themselves.
Yeah, I love that. So my focus on between these three things, I definitely look at, the brain and the physical construct, and I talk about optimizing that system. But my bread and butter and the thing that lights me up and keeps me up at night thinking about it is the subconscious mind. So the subconscious mind, again, is this component that is invisible of our operating system. However, the part about it that is so fascinating, especially being a behavioral scientist, is that 97% of our behaviors come from the subconscious mind, and only about 3% of our behaviors come from the conscious mind. So the conscious mind is the one where we are actually thinking in that moment, making decisions, right? That's only happening 3% of the day. The rest of the time is coming from the subconscious mind. And the crazy thing about this, so the crazy thing about this is that the subconscious mind is programmed. So this is like a set of programs that we live our life by that kind of are running in the background. And the crazy thing about that is that this is developed within us between the ages of 0 and 7-ish. Some say it goes up to about 12. But between the ages of 0, so when you're still in the womb, to the age of 7, you are basically fully programmed. And then you're sent out into the world, and that is the set of programs that you're working off of. Unless you, as an adult, take a look at, okay, so these are my programs. And then there are ways in which you can optimize these programs or reset these programs or install new programs to erase kind of bad programs. Because unfortunately, from the ages of 0 to 7, our main focus is to survive, right? So no matter what experiences we have, anything that makes us feel unsafe, for some people that could have been an argument with their sister, or that could be the birth of a younger sibling and they didn't get as much attention, right? And for some, it could be way more dramatic. It could be some kind of traumatic event when they were a child, something that made them unsafe, or they didn't have their basic needs met. But either way, every time something happens that threatens your life, not necessarily logically, but that's kind of what your body thinks when these things happen, traumas, we could call them, then you program in a little program that helps you to survive that moment. And then later on in life, when you're in your 20s, 30s, 50s, you're still running off of that program, though that threat is no longer there. So that is the reason why we have a lot of these kind of programs that are no longer serving us and these behaviors that we don't like, but we have a hard time changing them because they are programmed in, and it's a little bit difficult to access the subconscious and reprogram it. And we can talk about exactly how to do that a little bit later on, but it is possible to reprogram the subconscious mind. And I love to dive into that aspect as well.
Really great. So 2 things I got out of that. First and foremost is that just to repeat, our consciousness is not really, we think that we're thinking up our thoughts or we think we're taking these actions, but they're coming through this subconscious filter. So that's kind of like a lens that everything gets through. And that's often programmed in an aspect of ourselves in our childhood we may not even remember. Yes. And that colors, that without intervention, colors our world. But you're going to say that we can change that. We're going to get to that in a minute. I want to go back to the mind piece 1 second. The separation of the mind and the brain. So there's the physiological component as the brain, and the mind is the mind, and which is the filter, if you will, which is often based on these traumas. So you'll go, wait, this is getting really out there. And Eckhart Tolle, by the way, my friends of mine actually published his book. I know.
Really?
Yeah, he lived in Vancouver, so I'm a Vancouver guy. So he was on the bench and all that stuff. So it's really cool. But long story short, there's a really great exercise that everybody can do on this podcast. And then we're going to get into how do you program your subconscious so that we know that we're not just talking a bunch of woo.
Yeah.
And here it is. If you cut off your arm, are you still you? If you cut off your other arm, are you still you? If you cut off your legs, are you still you? Yeah, of course you're still you. So in other words, you're not your body. And I can observe my thoughts. Right now, you're probably thinking something and you can observe those thoughts. So obviously you can't be your thoughts because you can't be your body and you can't be your thoughts. Well, you also know your feelings, right? It's like, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. Well, that means you're not your feelings either. So these are some sort of biological programmed response system based on subconscious programming that probably got implanted at some point. You don't even know how it is. And your life is kind of going on autopilot with these minor interventions through life. Would that be accurate?
That is accurate. And I love that description. Oftentimes I like to ask people, well, who are you? And they'll say, oh, well, I'm Kayla, I'm a health scientist, I'm a, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a whatever. And I'm like, okay, but that doesn't describe who you are. Who are you? Without all those things, who are you? Okay, well, I like to do these things and I enjoy these hobbies and I have a podcast or whatever. Okay, but who are you? Right? And you keep asking that. And then it gets to this part where, I don't even have the answer to that. And I've been asking myself this question for a while now. I don't have the answer to who am I? Who is the one that's underneath all this programming that we get from society? It comes from outside of us. But who is the one inside that was there all along?
There's a great book by Nisargadatta Maharaj called I Am That. And it opens up where it says, when were you born? And he goes, I wasn't. That's the opening. That's the opening. and I've also heard, so he had said, one of his practices was Ramana was, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And I remember Dr. Hawkins said, well, go beyond that, try say, what am I? What am I? So you're not your things, your possessions, what you do. There's a deeper aspect. So tell us more about this.
Yeah. So when it comes to the subconscious mind, and I would love to talk about optimizing the brain as well, because there are a couple things that we could clarify on that side that are important. So, the physical aspect of our body and our brain is important because it carries out the response from the mind. So for instance, if you get scared or you get sad or you get angry, you have a physical response to that, right? So the physical part of the body is very, very important. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when it comes to the subconscious mind, like you said, this is what's underlying. This is the program that is underlying everything, or the set of programs that's underlying everything we do, think, feel, our beliefs, emotions, all of it. So, like I said, there are a lot of programs installed within every one of us that are no longer serving us. And so the first step to reprogramming these is to first become aware of these programs that are no longer serving us. So, for instance, if you have road rage, we'll take that for example. The first step to being able to reprogram this behavior, which comes from a subconscious program that's deep down somewhere that has manifested in road rage, is to determine when you are experiencing road rage to be aware of it. Oh, okay, I am experiencing road rage. At first, of course, you're not going to be able to change that behavior, but you can become aware of it and also become aware of how you're feeling in your body when that happens. So you'll feel your face get hot. You'll feel your hands start shaking. There is a physical response that can cue you in. Oh, I am experiencing this subconscious program. And then you can start kind of unraveling it. And there's ways to do that. So the long way, and I'm not against this at all. I've been to therapy for many years myself. So the long way is to unravel that through like talk therapy, right? And the short way, there's a few shortcuts for this. And, us as biohackers, we always want to know what the shortcut is because we want to do as much as possible with the time that we have here. So one shortcut is very simple, anybody could do, which is repetition. So repeating something over and over and over, it will eventually become a program, and it will become the dominant program over the old program that you no longer want. So if, for instance, road rage is your program, then you could, every time you get into the car, maybe you turn on a calming music station, or maybe you get in the car and you take a few deep breaths and you say, my intention is to stay calm for this drive, or you do something that you're going to enjoy in the car so that you won't get so upset. And eventually, over time, that'll become your new program. Another way to do it is through hypnosis, which is something that I am specializing in, clinical hypnosis. And this is mostly working in the theta brainwaves, right? And when you're in that state, then you are able to access the subconscious mind more directly. So in your conscious mind, you're mostly in, that beta and alpha brainwave. It's very difficult to access your subconscious mind in that state. However, when you're in a state of hypnosis, or increased suggestibility is also what it's called, you can access that subconscious mind, and you're more able to, one, recall some of these memories that caused the subconscious program. And number two, you can actually replace those thoughts, beliefs, emotions, these programs, right, with something new. And of course, it's not that simple, but if you work with a really skilled hypnotist, a clinical hypnotist, then you can more easily reprogram these things. It's very successful for behaviors like smoking, or behaviors like drinking, or anger, road rage. These kinds of things are very, or not easy, but they have a lot of success using hypnosis to reprogram these behaviors. And another one that is really interesting, that's just coming to the forefront of science, is psychedelics, which is like a super highway shortcut to the subconscious mind. It gets you into a state of hypnosis, and it is a very powerful way to change your perspective. So perspective is another way to describe your subconscious mind and your view of reality, right? So psychedelics are a really interesting one that are just starting to come to the forefront. And one of the big organizations that run all of the research in that field is MAPS. So if folks are interested, that's a MAPS, I think it's just maps.org. And you can check out some of the research happening. There's some really interesting things there. And for instance, one study is showing that the use of psychedelics can cure post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a sort of programming of the subconscious mind, that can be reprogrammed and sometimes cured completely within one session of a psychedelic experience. So that's kind of an exciting new field and new way to start to reprogram the subconscious mind.
Yeah, it's amazing that, of course, there was an incredible amount of psychedelic research early in the 60s, and then that all kind of got kiboshed after the kind of Tim Leary, Ram Dass split. So Ram Dass and Tim Leary were kind of going around getting, drop in, drop out, which was really a lot of unregulated experimentation. And then it kind of dove into the dark corners of the world, and now seems to be resurging, oftentimes thanks to the internet. And just for our listeners, that doesn't mean to go randomly out and do a heroic doses of mushrooms unsupervised. Anytime that you go inside of those type of experiences, it's great to have someone who understands that particular plant or that particular psychedelic, or has some ability, whether that's a neuropsychologist or someone who has experience in that, or some sort of shamanic person that has experienced those things, can be extraordinarily valuable. And I and many of my friends have used psychedelics as an interactory medium in order to use it. This is not a recreational thing. It's something that you can actually do. And I think a lot of people mistake that. It's like, oh yeah, let's go do this XYZ and go to the nightclub. No, it doesn't work like that. And so the traditions throughout many native cultures which interacted with, and where a lot of our psychopharmacology and its ability to heal, or plant medicines used in this way, there is traditions and practices and sacredness, and there's a set and setting. is a really important component. And you can the thing is the downside is without guidance, you can go into some dark aspects of your mind that you're not aware of, and just as much as you can go to the celestial realms of, extraordinary places. And so, I think it's a great thing. Yeah, please do. Bring it up.
One thing that you bring up that's really important is when I say that you can reprogram the subconscious mind, when you go into these states of either hypnosis, using psychedelics, or repetition, all of this works to reprogram with positive programs, but it also works to reprogram with negative programs. So you have to be careful, because repetition of negative habits will program in a negative program, right? And so same thing with psychedelics. If you have a negative experience or bring up something that you're not ready or able to work through, it can also program a negative program. So that's very important that you mention that. And something else I'd like to mention is, with what we're experiencing with COVID and with all of the civil unrest that we're experiencing right now, this is a traumatic event, right? So traumatic events that happen, or things that are shocking to people, put them into a state of high suggestibility or hypnosis. So not to say that we're walking around zombies and we're in a state of hypnosis and we don't know what we're doing. However,
but we are.
To an extent, yes.
Just laughing about that. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. But even though we think we're in complete control of our thoughts and emotions and minds and all of this, we are in a state of heightened suggestibility, a state of hypnosis right now. So it's important that whatever you're doing during this time of unsurety, of stress, of anxiety, things are also different right now. It is important to pay attention to what you're programming into your subconscious, because if you, for instance, are spending this entire time in a state of fear, anxiety, overwhelm, risk programming that into your subconscious mind, and then moving forward, this will be a program that you act upon. However, if you look at this as an opportunity to have kind of a shortcut to the subconscious mind right now and program in some positive behavior, some positive changes that you might have been wanting to change for a while, right now is a great time to do it. So spend more time on your meditation practice, spend more time connecting with your family, try to get rid of some of those bad habits, smoking, eating fast food, whatever it is. Right now is a great time to change those programs.
You bring up something good. And so traditionally, this was known historically as mantra or japa, which is the process of repeating something over and over and over again. Now, where is that also in our modern society? It's in our music, it's in our television. And so you have to recognize that much of what we're watching and doing is shaping our subconscious, and you said something very powerful, that this is a traumatic event. So what you tune into at this time is really going to determine a lot of how your life unfolds in a number of months. And I know I was commenting, thankfully I've been working in this for many, many years, and I was commenting with a friend of mine last night, and who also has a practice about working on conscious mind. We were chatting, and it's kind of a personal story, but I said, it's almost embarrassing, because since COVID's happened, despite everything, it's like everything in my life keeps getting better. And yet in conversations with people, that you bring up one topic and they go this kind of whether it's a political thing or whether you should wear masks or not, all this sort of stuff. And I'm witnessing it, and I go, that's not a mental response. There's being an exercise physiologist, I'm like, there's some sort of physical overwhelm that's just happened here. That nervous system has been hijacked, and there's an inability to communicate in an effective, responsible, civilized way. That's the aspect of civilization, is groups of people getting together and operating collectively without going to war like they did for thousands of years. What's your take on all this? I want to dive a little deeper in this because I think it's really fascinating what's going on and how to, like, you know, as you know, you don't want to be the guy in Star Wars that didn't pull up when Luke Skywalker said pull up.
Yeah.
Right. One guy stayed on target, blew up, his friend pulls up and gets out of the thing, but when his ship's damaged, our ship is damaged.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what people are forgetting, first of all, people are reacting from their mostly bad programs, right? So I can
Right.
understand that it's not their fault that they're acting that way. However, like we said, the first step would be becoming aware, self-aware of this behavior so that you can change it. The other thing that I think people are forgetting is that we are all uniquely individual in that our brain and our mind and our this third aspect, soul, is all completely different with every person, meaning that the world that we perceive and experience around us, our reality, is each very different. And these folks that are kind of pushing these polar opinions that are very shocking, that are very, they bring up a physiological response in most of us, right? These folks are forgetting that most people are not experiencing a reality on the polar ends of the spectrum. They might be, but most people are somewhere in the middle, or like up here or back here, you know? They're not on these polar ends, and they're experiencing a reality that is so different from the reality that you are trying to push forward and say is the only one. So if we can have a little bit of compassion for people and understand, one, that they are reacting based on programs, that it's not their fault that they're there. And number two, that everyone experiences a unique reality. And if we can understand that and come from a place of compassion and meeting people where they are instead of trying to push our reality on somebody else, then I think we could come to a resolution and also save our own nervous systems and not end up with adrenal fatigue and leaky gut and all these things that result from overtaxing the adrenal system, right? So that's kind of where I stand on that. I hope that people can maybe hear this and have a little bit more compassion for somebody else who is in a very reactive state.
So you bring up something here, so I think which is really important to identify. And this is really important because it's related to responsibility. And this is something that I don't think everybody today is talking about rights, but few people are talking about the responsibility one has to be as an adult in order to maintain or obtain rights. It's like you don't get to drive the car until you've passed a driver's test. You don't get to go to university unless you've got through high school. You know, you don't get to buy the $1 million house if you haven't earned that money, or, these type of things. So society is set up with these kind of aspects of responsibilities. And I'm using those terms on external things. And when you've created the merit, you get that right to do that. Okay, or you get to experience that, or you get a range of choices that increases relative to the level of responsibility you want to take on. But what is the message to someone who's caught in a cycle of victimhood, a cycle of oppression, a cycle of poverty, a cycle of trauma, and you see this over and over, like we all know the story of the woman who is married to a guy that abuses her. She gets out of the relationship, leaves thing, goes to a room. There's 500 guys in the place, and she connects with the one guy that's an abuser and gets in another abusing relationship. Yep. Going back to that stuff. Can you explain how you work with someone who is really attached to being a victim?
Yeah. So I just want to mention that woman who is choosing the abusive partner over and over, that's because her subconscious program or programs are running, and it's not within her control. So she keeps choosing that again and again. So until she changes those programs and those belief systems that she has, or those thought processes, she will continue to choose that person. So,
and this could also be the same for someone who continues to gain weight and says it's quote unquote
yes,
big bones in my body, but they're not saying, hey, this was the
yes,
belief systems that led to the behaviors in my family that I had to change, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. So this is a hard thing because, first of all, if you're talking about somebody who is in a state of victimhood because they are unsafe, this is very difficult. You can't change this behavior and pattern until that person has their safety need met, meaning they need to have all of their baseline needs covered before they can start working on this. So for instance, somebody who is experiencing homelessness or sexual abuse or physical abuse, until they are in a safe place, there is no way for them to work on that. One way that all of us who are a little more able, we have more resources at our hands to identify somebody like this and potentially help them, is to, like I said before, have a little compassion, meet them where they are, and maybe help them to get their needs met. Once their needs are met, then the next step can be taken, which is self-awareness. When your needs are met, your nervous system can calm down, you can get into a sympathetic state, and then you can actually start to make choices, right? You can start to reprogram that subconscious mind by first identifying these constructs, these belief systems, these thought processes that are not serving you.
So let's talk about those needs too. I want to
Yeah.
talk about, like, what are those needs that prevent someone from being able to get that they're in that fight or flight adrenal cortisol thing. And I think a lot of people are there that are suffering.
Yeah.
And how do you get a person out of there by getting those needs met?
Well, the best way is to ask the person, what could I do for you right now to make you feel safe and comfortable? And what we're talking about here with basic needs, from like a social perspective, is having shelter, food, enough resources to live your life comfortably, love, support, community, connection. All of these things are important for baseline health, right? It kind of goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of health. And those are like the big bucket, the basic needs that have to be met before you can start to optimize other levels of your health. So the best way, if you see somebody struggling and they're in this state of kind of spinning their wheels, instead of saying, quit eating fast food if you don't want to be fat, like that's not going to help the person, right? Instead, if they are kind of spinning their wheels and they keep telling you like, oh, I can't lose the weight, you could say, what's going on in your life right now that, that I could maybe help you to take the load off? What would make you feel safe, or how could I help you to feel comfortable, and how can I help you to get your needs met? A lot of people have never been asked this before. And so
Right.
just that question could spark in them, oh, my needs are not being met. I didn't even realize that. I can't feel safe.
That's huge.
And then they can start to change.
And this is something that we can do with our kids. We can do this with our spouse. We can have these conversations about, hey, a lot of strife and a lot of conflict within people is because people say, hey, my needs aren't being met, or they feel that, and then what typically happens is they project onto the other person that person is withholding the achievement of my needs. So now it even flips to another level, is like, not only are my needs not met, is you're the problem.
Yeah.
Right? My mom, my dad, my brother, my boss, my husband, my wife, my uncle, my aunt, my government, my whatever is preventing you from achieving whatever it is. And you become in this, you take away your own power. Is that not so?
Yeah, that is true. And I do think that when you're in a very reactive state like that, it is a result of, one, bad programs that are no longer serving you, that are coming up. So maybe a lack of safety when you were a child. And number two, you are in a very reactive state at that point. So when you're in a reactive state, in that fight or flight state, you can't really communicate effectively with somebody who's in that state. So a better way to communicate with them is to either help them to activate their parasympathetic nervous system and calm down if they're able to hear you and be helped in that way, or walk away, wait for them to come out of that reactive state. And then when they're calm and you're having like a nice conversation, or, you know, they're back to baseline, then you can breach the subject like, hey, is there something that I could do to make you feel more safe, more loved, get your needs met? Not when they're in the reactive state. You have to do this when they're in a calm state and they could hear you.
Right. Because let's talk about that reactive state and then how that connects in the body. What's going on there that prevents them from flipping out? Can you talk about maybe some of the physiological components?
Yeah. So when somebody's in a very reactive state, again, they're in that fight or flight state, which is also known as the sympathetic nervous system is active. So we have what's called the autonomic nervous system, which goes from the brain all throughout the body, all the way down to your toes and fingertips. And this regulates your body's resources, essentially. And it sends signals like, I'm safe or I'm not safe, basically. So when you get into a fight or flight state, this used to happen, you know, back in prehistoric times when, like a lot of people say, when the lion was chasing us, we go into sympathetic nervous system. All our body's resources are put to our muscles so that we can run. And our heart is pumping, our breath rate goes up, and the blood is not flowing to the brain in that moment as much as it would be in a parasympathetic state, because all the resources are going out to the body so that you can react, right? It's the same thing that's happening when you get triggered by your spouse. when your spouse starts to yell at you for the same thing that you guys have an argument about all the time, you go into that sympathetic nervous system mode. All of the resources go into your body, and then you have a physical reaction. You get very upset, your face gets red and hot, your breath rate goes up, you maybe start yelling, and in that moment, you're in that really reactive state. Now, the opposite state of that is the parasympathetic nervous system, which brings you into a state of rest and digest. So this is when the caveman was done being chased by the lion, and he went back to his cave and everything was all good, and he cozied up by the fire, and then his parasympathetic nervous system kicked in and he was able to relax, have a meal, properly digest it, get to sleep. All of these things, these kind of basic physical components that happen, digestion, sleep, all of that can't really happen unless you can get into that parasympathetic state. So, for instance, with coronavirus and the whole situation that's going on, a lot of people are in that fight or flight, that sympathetic nervous system state all the time, right? And then we have our colleagues, biohackers, who are kind of out there telling us, well, you know, if you're stressed out and you're feeling tired, drink more coffee, take more nootropics, do a HIIT workout, and then you're just revving up that sympathetic nervous system. You are putting it into overdrive, and you're wearing your body out.
It's the equivalent of hitting the nitrous thing on the drag car, which will give you an extra boost in horsepower, but will blow your engine if you continue to do that.
Exactly. So the opposite of that, you know, it is important to be able to get up and do your work and go, right? But then at night, when it's time to shut that off, you are supposed to easily be able to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system, start to detune, start to produce melatonin, which is the hormone that helps you to fall asleep, and relax, digest your meal, connect with your partner, and that will kind of regenerate your energy for the next day.
Amazing information and value. And so let's talk about maybe how do we, if we let's say we're at a different state. So we've recognized, you know what, I'm not producing the result that I want to produce. Now, 97% of that result is in my subconscious. and only 3% is in my conscious. So I read this book, I take this tape, I do whatever, but that's not really enough. How do I implement, I guess, a sort of conditioning program, like you would do a training program or something like that? So if you're doing repetition, how would I do that in order to produce different results in my life, or a different mindset, like change my mind, which will change my physiology, which will change my relationship maybe to my body?
Yeah. So a couple ways that I mentioned are, one, repetition. So if you make this a habit and then
How much? What's a repetition? Once a week,
well,
once a day, once a year, once every hour? Tell us what's the research saying?
yeah, I wish the research had a definitive answer. Some people say, a habit takes 30 days. Some people say it takes 60 days. Some of the research supports both of those, and some of the research can say it can happen almost like instantaneously. I think what it depends on is how deep that subconscious programming is. And it also has to do with that physical brain aspect, right? So when we have a behavior, it's a pattern, it's a neural pathway. So when we have neural pathways that we act on every day, it becomes a well-worn path. Think of like a path you're walking down in the forest on the dirt ground. Okay, you keep walking down that path every day, every day, every day. It becomes super well-worn, and maybe one day it even turns into like a river. Now, imagine a river. How easy is it to redirect a river?
Difficult.
Not very easy, right? So if the neural pathway is just maybe a lightly worn pathway, then I think the repetition would be less, because you can more easily change that path. If the neural pathway is like a river, it's something you've been doing your entire life and it's well worn, it's something you do every day, multiple times per day, then I would say it's probably going to take a lot more repetition to redirect the river and create a new path for the river, right? And so that's where the brain aspect and optimizing that brain aspect can come into handy as well. So again, with the subconscious, you can do repetition, you can do hypnosis. Some people are starting to use psychedelics for this. Meditation also, I just want to mention, is a great tool for that first step in behavior change, which is self-awareness. Because meditation, what that does, I think the biggest benefit of it is that it allows you to become self-aware. So when you have that stimulus, instead of just having an immediate reaction, you can have stimulus, a moment to think about it, and then a response instead of a reaction. So that's one great tool and kind of the first step. But when it comes to the brain and you're talking about neural pathways, so when we're talking about changing a neural pathway, we are talking about neuroplasticity, right? So this is changing the shape of your brain. Now, there's another term that's thrown out there a lot.
It doesn't mean growing a horn out of your head. That just means you're changing the way your brain actually routes its nervous system pathways, right?
Exactly. So the horn growing out of your head, not necessarily a horn, but actually growing new nerve cells, that can happen too, but that's something else. That's called neurogenesis. These two are two separate things, though people often mix up the terms and use them interchangeably.
Can you state the difference?
But yeah, the neural pathway. Yes. So neuroplasticity, like we were talking about the pathways, that is redirecting the neural pathways in the brain. It's kind of changing the way your brain communicates. The neurogenesis is actually growing your brain. So neuroplasticity is changing the shape, it's molding the brain. Neurogenesis is growing the brain, new nerve cells. So there is a difference between the two, but both can be very beneficial, especially in behavior change. And so we could talk about how to do each of these if that sounds interesting.
Yeah, let's go there. I'm having so much fun here. I love these topics. So let's get into it.
Yeah. So when we're talking about neuroplasticity, there are some things that can spark neuroplasticity, make your brain more plastic, more moldable. One of my favorite ways to do this is to do something new. So for instance, if you sleep on the opposite side of the bed, take a different pathway to work than what you normally take. Brush your teeth with your opposite hand. do something small that's totally different and outside of your normal routine. That is going to spark neuroplasticity and make you more able to create new neural pathways or replace old pathways with new ones.
Right.
So that's one way, and also very relevant with the situation that we're experiencing globally, because we are all thrown out of our normal routine right now. So that means right now we are all experiencing increased neural plasticity. Again, why it's very important to pay attention to our habits and behaviors, because we are creating new neural pathways and new subconscious programs. So we do have to pay attention to how we're behaving right now. Now, when we're talking about neurogenesis, we're talking about actually growing new nerve cells, new brain cells, which is amazing to me. And this only has come to light in research in the past 5 years or so. So it's very new. The brain's pretty cool. It's like the ocean. We've only really explored 1% of it, but this is the kind of new, exciting thing that we're looking at right now. And so this has to do.
Yeah. Can you explain, how do you grow new brain cells?
Yeah. and it's not so simple. So yes, you can grow new brain cells, but you can't just be like, all right, brain cells grow, right? It's not that.
That might help. That might help tell our bodies, right? It might tell our physics if we say that all the time.
I agree. I actually agree. I think that would definitely help. But there are some things that we can do, like physically, that will do this. And so, so this is where we would look at kind of the nutritional components. There are some behavioral components. So first of all, anything that increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, people have probably heard about this. So anything that sparks that will help to grow new brain cells. And the other one is nerve growth factor. So anything that boosts that and BDNF will help to grow new brain cells. So this can be exercise. Sex is a really great way to grow new brain cells. Sleep is essential. That is when most of our new brain cells are going to be growing, and that is when our body allows that to happen. And then things like intermittent fasting can boost that BDNF and start to create neurogenesis. But there are also some nootropics, is a popular term for it right now. It's kind of like smart supplements, right? Yep. So my favorite one is choline, which actually increases the biosynthesis of phospholipids, which are the building blocks of our nerve cells. But then there are other things that can also help with this neurogenesis, things like lion's mane, which actually improves the myelin sheath that goes around the brain cell to make it more healthy. And then there are a third set of nootropics that are more about decreasing oxidative stress, so that it's not necessarily about neurogenesis, but it's about avoiding the death of brain cells. And so things like curcumin, turmeric, things like green tea or blueberries, these antioxidants are very helpful in this process.
I'm a big fan of all of those things. In fact, I notice a few years back, I was going through a very stressful time. Excuse me. And I used 3 grams of lion's mane a day, very high grade lion's mane. I actually did an episode on this with a fellow who was an expert on it. And it made an amazing difference in my memory. It was radical how well it is, but I did have to use 3 grams per day. What are some of your favorites?
Lion's mane is definitely one of my favorites. And then when we're also talking about like adding in the building blocks of our brain cells, omega-3 fatty acids are very important for this. So making sure that you get good sources of like fish oils can be really helpful with neurogenesis. But another one, kind of an unsung hero of the brain, is B12, vitamin B12, which actually provides the energy for neurogenesis. And there's a lot of really cool research going on with vitamin B12 and deficiency and how it's linked with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and dementia. And they actually saw that folks who are deficient in vitamin B12 have a shrinkage of their brain, meaning they're losing volume, they're losing brain cells. And folks who are not vitamin B12 deficient have larger brains, more brain cells. So that is a really interesting one that is showing a lot of efficacy in brain health.
One of the things that I suggest for people to do is you can do a SpectraCell test, which will actually do a determination of what nutrients you could be deficient in, and also how well your body absorbs those particular nutrients. And so for myself, being on a plant-based diet, making sure that I'm getting my three, 6s, and 9s. I actually use a product called Udo's oil and a lot of hemp oil and things like that. I also supplement with B12 daily. I periodically do injections of B12, which I think a lot of people can really benefit from. Also using lion's mane is another great one. And also including fasting. I just went through a period of 3 months where I did alternate day fasting, 12 hours eating, 36 hours off, which is great. Also intermittent fasting. I've been fasting for over 20 years. All of these things I've noticed massive improvements in cognitive function, creativity, ability, and also I would say the ability to change tracks from one thing to something else. Like, okay, I'm doing this. Now I need to consciously do something differently and move into it, because that's not my natural state. My natural state is pretty rigid. But the more that I do these things, the more fluid I've become. So I do believe that's true. So what else? What else is going on in the brain body bind? Tell us more.
Yeah. So I do want to mention one thing, which is these behavioral aspects, like doing a high intensity workout, intermittent fasting, or a very strict ketogenic diet. These things do boost BDNF and they do help with neurogenesis. However, they all do provide a level of stress on your adrenal system, and they can activate that sympathetic nervous system. So if you are already a very stressed out person, let's say like your stress bucket is already full and overflowing, you're probably experiencing symptoms like anxiety, maybe depression, maybe you're experiencing autoimmune symptoms, things like that. Then that's a good sign that you should not use these biohacks that are going to add a level of stress. Even though it is eustress, which is, positive stress, it still adds towards your stress threshold. And we each have a stress threshold, though we can raise it or lower it with certain tools, but we all have a stress threshold. And once it's met with either positive or negative or a combination of both kinds of stress, then you start to see distress of the body, and then you start to see disease of the body, right? So it's important to mention that as well.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been getting a lot of interesting responses, and I don't know what your research is, but it's an area that we want to get more involved in, is the use of magnesium as a way to calm the body. And so I used it in going into like super physiological dosages, but the testimonials keep coming in because magnesium is a key deficiency that's been going on. It's regulated 350 different components, and also the fight or flight response. And we use a lot of it. And a lot of, I first got turned on to it by the strength sensei. So Charles Poliquin, who has using magnesium with high level athletes. He was using fish oil with these athletes as well. He was using a variety of different things that are used in neuroplasticity, but these are also correlated with calming the nervous system down, because Olympic and high performance athletes are putting incredible amounts of stress on the body. Are there any other key elements that someone needs to be addressing if they're feeling quote unquote stressed, not just from the nutrition side, but maybe the environmental factors? I mean, we can talk about that contribute to that feeling unsafe, or feeling that I need to run from whatever it is or fight whatever it is. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So from the nutritional side, a couple other ones that are important is, you want to look at both your antioxidant system and then, like you said, certain minerals and vitamins that are very important. They're called cofactors for the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, which, ends in ATP, which is our body's energy system for our mitochondria. And that's a whole other conversation. But you need both zinc and magnesium and vitamin B12 as cofactors. However, physical stress and mental stress, which all cause oxidative stress, use up those vitamins and minerals very quickly. And then you don't have enough to create your energy for your body. So it is important, if you are very stressed, to, one, if you don't already know what your status is, it's great to take a look at those levels in your body. And two, if you already know you're stressed out, it's pretty safe to go ahead and add in magnesium. And you can add in different types of magnesium, glycinate, threonate, whatever is your, you can do a combination. And then to add in zinc, though you do want to be careful about your copper zinc ratio. So if you add too much zinc, you could bring your copper down too low, which is also a cofactor that we need. So it's better to take a look at where you are, what your status is, and then do a proper dosage. But magnesium is a pretty safe one to add in. And then when it comes,
I take Dave Asprey's zinc copper that he makes. It's a great product, and his store is just down the street from me. I pick up a bottle and I use that. It's been great. It's also great for men's prostate health as well, zinc. And so it's a huge thing.
Yeah. And I just want to mention for ladies, if there are women who have a copper IUD, which is a form of birth control, and many women have this, they have to be careful about their copper levels in their body, which actually can deplete their zinc. So if you're already deficient in zinc and then you have a copper IUD, which brings up your copper levels a little bit, then it can lower that zinc even more, which can contribute to, your stress levels, oxidative stress, and all that stuff. So it is important to know what's going on in your body and how these different things interact. But the other one I want to mention is your antioxidant system. And our master antioxidant is glutathione. So glutathione is going to help to decrease that oxidative stress and keep your body healthy. And also, when your antioxidant system is boosted, will be less likely to deplete your other vitamins and minerals like zinc, like magnesium, like B12 that you need for ATP synthesis.
So can you talk about where we can get some glutathione and how do we do that?
Yeah. So there are actual L-glutathione or L-glutamine, supplements that you can take. And I take a sublingual one from Quicksilver Scientific. They have a really great product. That's my favorite way to do it. You can do it in like a powder form, but I like to do a combination of glutathione with my magnesium, which just makes you feel really good. It makes you feel kind of like
the
calm.
liquid stuff, the glutathione product from Quicksilver is really good. They give me great products. I like that company.
Yeah.
So let's go. I want to, we're going over our normal time, but it's been so great. We're going to have to bring you back to the show. So let's just talk real quick about maybe, can you run us through the best practices that you would say that a person, hey, you want to have a healthy brain that's going to run your life and you want to be able to get your mind, brain, and body working together, what would you suggest, or maybe you can take us through what you do in order to kind of create this optimal state of mind, body, spirit, if you will?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to be able to get into a state of parasympathetic rest and digest so that you are able to work on this. So handling your stress levels is so important. First of all, being aware of all these stressors in your life. And like you said, there are environmental stressors and emotional stressors as well. For instance, there could be, chemical toxins in your environment, or if you live in a big city, there's a lot of air pollution. That is also adding to your stress level. And then if you are, for instance, in a difficult relationship or if you're in a situation where you're around people that are not supporting your emotional wellness, that's another level of stress. So I think becoming aware of what is contributing to your stress threshold, and then kind of taking a look at your body and what you're experiencing. If you're experiencing symptoms of adrenal fatigue and you're having brain fog and you're having digestive issues and you're having mood swings and all these things, it's a pretty good sign that you have surpassed your stress threshold. And so you want to raise that stress threshold, and you want to try to remove some of the stressors as you can. And some ways to raise that stress threshold are to do things like mindfulness practice. Meditation is such a great tool. And I know that this is like not the sexy answer because everybody's answer is meditation, but it is such a great tool because, like I said before, it increases that space between stimulus and response and gives you a chance to make a conscious decision on how you want to respond. And then eventually over time, that'll become a subconscious program. So I think number one, handling your stress. Number two is also related to that and can be done with the same modality, which is meditation, which is raising your self-awareness. You have to become aware of these programs that are no longer serving you. And the first step is to kind of identify the behaviors that you no longer want, and then look a little bit deeper into where these come from.
Is that even possible unless you get some outside help? I think initially it's probably getting some expert help to help you identify these things, that maybe that it's not a friend or not a relationship partner or someone like that, someone who's trained to help identify those things and offer suggestions. Would you say that's a great intervention? Because I don't know if you can even look at yourself sometimes unless you've got to a certain place.
Yeah. So if you're going to seek outside help, which I think is a great place to start, to go to somebody who is educated and also doesn't have a horse in the race, right? So you don't necessarily want to go to the person who is triggering you for help. You want to get away from that, right?
Right.
You don't want to go to your partner that is causing you to be upset and talk to them about, hey, I'm trying to change this behavior. They can be part of the solution by avoiding that trigger so that you can start to work on it and reprogram it. But I do think going to somebody who has an outside perspective, it doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist. It can be somebody who can hear you, help you kind of work through this stuff, who doesn't have a predetermined outcome for you. So somebody who doesn't have a horse in the race, right? Somebody outside of yourself or your circle of people who are kind of in the muck with you.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what are some other things that you can do? And once you've identified that, and then what?
Yeah. So once you identify it, then you can start to kind of get your hands dirty and reprogram. Again, repetition is a great one. So for instance, if I want to not be so reactive, or if I'm working on an anger issue, let's say an anger issue, and every time I come home and walk through the door, I automatically feel my physiological response. My face gets hot, my heart starts racing, my breathing goes up, and I'm already going into fight or flight mode because I know that when I go home, usually there's a fight or there's some uncomfortable situation waiting for me. So it's important to, first of all, like we said, understand that this is the situation, identify it, and then go in with some tools, with some ability to kind of change your perspective. So one thing that I love to do, because like I said, our conscious mind is only that 3%, so you can't control your behaviors all the time. But you can set reminders or triggers, I like to call them. So for instance, every time I walk through a doorway, not every time, but I like to do this most times, is I set an intention at the doorway, which becomes a trigger for me now. Every time I walk through a doorway, I set an intention for what I want to get out of the experience on the other side. And it changes my perspective about it. So instead of going home and thinking, oh, great, here we go, I'm going to be upset, we're going to get into a fight, I would go home and say, you know what? when I walk through this door, I want to benefit from this situation inside in this way. And then it kind of changes your perspective. Another way to change your perspective or kind of flip that switch is with gratitude. So one thing that I do for my trigger for that, because again, it's hard to always remember to do these things, I set an alarm on my phone. So a couple times a day, I have an alarm that goes off on my phone, and it says, remember to be grateful, or list 3 things that you're grateful for, or close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths and think of somebody that you're grateful for who is in your life. It's just these little reminders. And again, it takes repetition. So over time, these things can replace the old behaviors and old patterns and old thoughts and old beliefs into the ones that you would prefer to have.
Very, very, very powerful information. And so perhaps, how do people get a hold of you and learn more about this stuff? We're going to get you back on the podcast because I could just go on and on and on and on and on about this stuff. It's so fascinating. Where can people reach you? How do they find out more about you and what you have to offer and things that you're doing right now?
Yeah, the best place to reach me directly is probably on Instagram. And my handle is at BioCurious_Kayla. And so if you direct message me there or interact with me in the comments, I respond to everybody personally. So that is a great place. You can also email me directly at biocuriouskayla@gmail.com. My website, which I have a cooperative of biohacking tools and information and research and meetups and different things like that within the BioCurious community. It's biocuriouskayla.com. And then I have a podcast, which you were recently a guest on, and that is also called BioCurious, and it's on all the platforms, so you can search for that.
Super fun. One of the most fascinating interviews. And I know we just scratched the surface. We're going to get you back, Kayla, as we dive a little bit deeper into this topic. It's something that's fascinating. But for all our listeners today, please reach out and check out Kayla's website. She's offering some very practical and informative. And also, you're literally on the bleeding edge. You know, researchers from maybe 10 years ago who aren't keeping up to their, snuff, as they say, won't be as familiar with some of the new literature about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis and all of these sort of things that are happening. So this is one of the beautiful things that's happening. Science is always changing. Science is always learning. Science is always developing. And the science says you do not have to suffer any longer.
Yes.
You can change your programs. You can change how your life is, and you can change your perspective. Listen to Kayla. Go to BioCurious. Check it out. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And I also want to thank our special guest, Kayla. You have been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. And I really appreciate you taking the time today to be on the Awesome Health Podcast. For all our listeners, we'll see you again next time on the next episodes where we dive into the secrets of science and your soul, one episode at a time. Take care.